Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our end of the year recap of the Texas Legislature. I'm Trista Bishop Watt, and I serve as the Director of Government Relations for Good Reason Houston. We are a Houston-based organization that works to ensure that every child in every neighborhood has access to a high-quality public school. Good Reason Houston builds awareness of, advocates for, and advises school districts on measures to improve the quality of public education available to all. Today, we'll be leaning into our awareness and advocacy measures as we chat public education policy. And as I said, we've got a lot to cover, so we'll go ahead and dig in. So here's what we're going to cover today. First, we'll start with an overview of the legislative process. I know many of you might already be veterans of the legislative process, but we're just going to give a refresher to kick us off before moving into Good Reason Houston's policy priorities. These are the things that we were looking for and focusing on throughout this year with the legislature. Next, the 88th regular session. This ran from January to May this year. We'll give an overview of that before moving into special sessions 1 and 2 during the summer on property tax. Then special sessions 3 and 4, which were this fall, and amongst other things, focused on education policy, before finally hitting on our recommendations moving forward and what we might be able to expect from the legislature. So a look at the Texas legislative process. The Texas legislature meets on a biennial basis. That means every 2 years. They're in session for up to 140 days on odd numbered years. And between regular legislative sessions, the governor is able to call 30-day special sessions to cover specific topics. And that's what we've seen multiple times this year. During this time, the legislature sets the budget for the biennium and considers legislation. The one that you'll hear most often is a bill. That's what's used to enact, amend, and repeal statutory law. Our legislature has 2 chambers, the Texas House of Representatives and the Texas Senate, both of which must approve legislation before it can be sent to the governor for signature. Bills each session are numbered in the order they are filed. However, the first several bills are usually held by each chamber for their top priority bills. And it's important to note this because each session, the bill numbers reset. That means, for example, that HB 3 from the 86th legislature, that's the bill that gave us the teacher incentive allotment and the early education allotment and a number of other landmark policies. That's not the same bill as we're going to be discussing in more depth today, which would be HB 3 from the 88th legislature that focused on safety. So the bill numbers do reset. HB 3 is not always the same HB 3 that you're used to hearing about, and I'll be sure to clarify as we go through. Here's an overview. This is the chart that the Texas legislature uses to show the legislative process. I'm not going to get into the whole process here because you can see it in front of you. But I will note that this is the process for House bills specifically. So the Senate bill process looks very similar. It's just that the chambers are switched. So bills begin in the first chamber. They're referred to committee. Public education bills are usually referred to in the House, either the House Public Education Committee or now the House Educational Opportunity and Enrichment Committee that was formed during the summer. This is a select committee that will not be permanent, but is currently functioning within the House. On the Senate side, it would be the Senate Education Committee. So those are the ones that we watch most closely. If the committee approves the bill, then it heads to the chamber floor for consideration. If the chamber approves it, it moves to engrossment and then over to the other chamber for basically the same process. If they amend that, then it's sent to the original chamber for either a concurrence that they agree with it, or they go to conference committee to hash out the differences. And once both chambers fully approve of the bill, then it is enrolled and sent to the governor for his consideration. He can either sign the bill, take no action, or veto it and send it back. Good Reason Houston's legislative priorities this session, there were 5 specific things that we focused on. We wanted to ensure that Texas has a robust and transparent academic assessment and accountability system. Focus on high quality instructional materials as a research-backed strategy to improve student outcomes. Elevate the teaching profession by strengthening the teacher pipeline and educator preparation programs, building strong foundations with high quality early learning and incentivizing the use of research-backed tools in the classroom, and sustaining those data-backed student-focused financial reforms that were outlined in HB3 from the 86th legislature, designed to improve student outcomes. So those were the things that we were really looking at and focusing on this legislative session. And you'll see that a lot throughout the presentation because those are the areas that I'm going to be highlighting most closely. But we will give an overview of some of the other things that were going on in terms of education policy. All right, diving into the 88th regular session. As I said, this was the biennial every second year regular session. It started this January and ran through May. So one of the landmark bills that passed this time around was HB 1605, focused on high quality instructional materials. What it does, is institutes a clear vetting process for instructional materials that considers quality and grade level appropriateness. The Texas Education Agency must maintain an open education resource material for English language arts and math and grades kindergarten through 8th grade, and pre-K materials related to English language arts and math, including all foundational curriculum courses and grades kindergarten through 5. And so TEA does currently have open education resource materials. This just makes the vetting process a little bit clearer between them and the State Board of Education. School districts are incentivized to adopt these high quality instructional materials with additional funding. So districts are entitled to $40 per student to purchase high quality instructional materials approved by the State Board of Education and $20 per student to print those materials. Districts may not require a classroom teacher for a core subject to spend required planning time creating or selecting materials to initially cover the Texas essential knowledge and skills. Those are the things that the state has said that our children should know as they go through the school system, unless the teacher has entered into a supplemental agreement. High quality instructional materials must be available using a parent portal so parents can follow along with what's happening in the classroom, and districts must make materials available for parent review. School boards must establish a process by which a parent can request a local review of classroom instructional materials. So that's what the bill does. And why this is important is in Texas, and actually across the nation, about 17% of third grade reading materials are actually on grade level. What that means is that our third graders are being taught using materials that are not actually up to the standards that we say that they should be learning in the classroom. So by incentivizing high quality instructional materials, we're incentivizing school districts to adopt materials that are on grade level and appropriate for those students to be learning so that they are able to keep up and not fall behind in their educational journey. Next up, we have HB 1416. This is related to accelerated learning. So some of you may be familiar with HB 4545 from the 87th legislature. This was a bill that required districts to provide accelerated instruction through high impact tutoring for students who were not able to pass the STAR exam. And this legislation was put in place because of pandemic related learning loss. We were seeing a lot of students who were far behind because of the disruption of the pandemic to their education. So the bill made sure that districts were going to identify those students and provide them with additional information so that they were able to catch up a little bit better. However, in response to that, there were a lot of implementation challenges highlighted by school districts. So HB 1416 provides a little bit more flexibility while still maintaining a research-backed student to teacher ratio. What the bill does is it removes the accelerated learning committees, which some of you might be familiar with. It changes the flat 30-hour tutoring requirement to a minimum of 15 hours instead. That allows the district a little bit more flexibility to determine when students need additional hours. only requires districts to provide accelerated instruction for 2 subjects, prioritizing math and English language arts. So what that means is that students might not pass a number of different STAR exams, but districts are only required to provide instruction for 2 subjects so that they're not completely overwhelmed. And then increasing the student to teacher ratio from 3-to-1 to 4-to-1. And that is still a research-backed student-teacher ratio. Just to be clear, they were able to maintain that. And it requires parents to be notified if a student is not performing at grade level. So those are the changes and what the legislature did to address the challenges with implementing HB 4545. Next, no cost dual credit, HB 8. This is an exciting bill that provides some opportunities for our high school kids to be able to access dual credit opportunities. So what this bill does is create the financial aid for Swift transfer program, which allows eligible students to enroll for free in dual credit courses at participating colleges. As students eligible to enroll if they are currently in a dual credit course at a participating college and were considered educationally disadvantaged at any time during the 4 years prior to their enrollment in that course. And educationally disadvantaged here means qualified for free and reduced lunch under the National School Lunch Program. So students who are educationally disadvantaged are able to access free dual credit courses at participating colleges. The participating colleges must allow eligible students to enroll in dual credit courses at no cost to the student, and for other students may only charge tuition at a rate that is at or below the maximum rate that's been established by the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. Colleges will receive funding based on the number of eligible students who enroll in dual credit courses, and districts must notify parents each year about FAST funding for dual credit so that parents are aware that their kids can take advantage of this program. So what this means is this is no charge for the student. The college will be reimbursed for the tuition from the state. Next, SB 2124, Advanced Math Pathways. Research shows that students who enroll in Algebra 1 by 8th grade, are able to take Algebra 1 by 8th grade, are generally better prepared throughout high school and college. So this bill requires districts to develop an advanced mathematics program in middle school that is designed to enable students to take Algebra 1 in 8th grade. Districts must automatically enroll students in 6th grade in advanced math who performed in the top 40% on the 5th grade STAR or a local measure. Local measures can include 5th grade class rankings or demonstrated proficiency in math coursework. The student's parent may opt them out of this automatic enrollment in advanced math, but the difference here is that a lot of the times districts have been using an opt-in sort of method where parents can opt their kids into advanced math. This means that they would be automatically enrolled if they rank in the top 40% of their 5th grade math scores. And then parents could opt them out if they wanted to. But again, research shows that students that start with advanced math early really have a great foundation moving forward for their math skills. And so we were very glad to see that this bill made it through. Next, HB 3 on school safety. Obviously, school safety is a topic that is close to a lot of people at the moment. And so this bill increased the per student safety allotment by 25 cents per student. So it went from $9.75 to $10 per student. In addition, districts receive $15,000 per campus to implement safety measures. It did require the districts and open enrollment charter schools have at least one armed security officer per campus, and each district must ensure compliance with all school facility standards that have been adopted by the Texas Education Agency related to safety and security. But it can claim a good cause exception. And we're actually going to talk a little bit more as we get into the special sessions about this good cause exception, because a lot of school districts had trouble meeting the requirements here and face some financial burden. It also requires evidence-based mental health first aid training for district employees who regularly have contact with students, and requires peace officers to complete active shooter training at least once every 4 years. So to be clear, this is HB3 that was passed in the regular session. We will see safety come up again in relation to this bill, but this is sort of the baseline of what was happening there. Here are some additional bills that passed, and I'm not going to go through each and every one, but what I will highlight is HB1 was the General Appropriations Act. And so when accounting for all state, local, and federal funds, public education received a total of $93.6 billion in funding for this biennium. That includes $17.6 billion that was set aside for property tax relief, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then around $4 billion that was set aside for legislation. So what this means is most of the increase that was provided to public education this biennium was actually in the form of additional funding. So I do want to clarify that is, the base level funding didn't change all that much, but the additional funding that was allocated there was set aside for property tax relief and $4 billion that was contingent upon legislation that needed to be passed. And what we actually saw with the regular session was that those pieces of legislation did not get past the finish line. They didn't pass in the regular session. So there was still $4 billion after May that the legislature had to work with, that they could allocate to different public education priorities. Here are some additional bills that were passed here. What I will highlight here, because I think a couple of these are really good to note, is that HB 2729 added additional options for teachers to meet the requirements to teach high quality pre-K classes and changed the qualification requirements for high quality pre-K teachers under contracted partnerships. So I want to be clear that while districts might have more flexibility if they're entering into a partnership with a childcare facility in terms of the teacher requirements, it didn't change much for the teachers that are teaching in district. Additionally, SB 68 allows students up to 2 school days for career investigation opportunities. So while kids have been enjoying the option to investigate different institutions of higher education, this now allows them to use 2 days for career investigation so that they can go and see different career pathways and find something that might be right for them. So now I'm going to turn to some of the things that did not pass during the regular session, but that we want to keep an eye out for, or opportunities that the legislature really missed. So first is on assessment and accountability changes that were ultimately unsuccessful. This is one that we're keeping our eye on because assessment and accountability is one of our priorities that I listed early on in the presentation. So there were a number of bills filed that would have introduced some uncertainty to our academic assessment and accountability system. For example, HB 4402 would have implemented non-academic measures, adding those to our accountability system. And that's something that concerns us because the more measures that you add to a system and roll up together, the harder it is for parents, community members, taxpayers to be able to untangle what each of those looks like. So we want to make sure that our accountability system is focused on core academics so that we can tell if our kids are getting those basic needs met before we focus on other things. We do think that non-academic measures are incredibly important. For example, extracurriculars was included in there. We want kids to be able to participate in that, but we also want to make sure that we have a laser focus on whether or not schools are adequately providing for them in terms of reading and writing. So those are ones that we're going to keep an eye on for in the future. And assessment and accountability did come up again during the special session, which we'll cover moving forward. Here's a missed opportunity that we're also going to touch on a few times throughout here. HB 11 was a comprehensive teacher support bill. It would have implemented a number of recommendations from the teacher vacancy task force. So the state convened a task force to explore and hear from teachers to see what they need, because we're experiencing a statewide teacher shortage. And what they found was there were a number of things that could help support teachers, including establishing a Texas teacher residency program where future educators are able to receive paid on-the-job training with a mentor teacher in pursuit of their teaching certification. Increasing the commitment to reward and retain highly effective educators by adding an additional level to the teacher incentive allotment. So the teacher incentive allotment is an amount of funding that is available to school districts for teachers who are rated highly effective. Right now it has 3 tiers. This would have added an additional tier to expand the opportunity to even more teachers throughout the state. Requiring the Texas Education Agency to provide technical support to school districts for strategic staffing and strengthening teacher pipelines, and then providing for some quality of life improvements for educators and future educators, including making the children of teachers eligible for free public pre-K, increasing funding for mentorship opportunities, and support for certification costs, which we know can be burdensome for teachers. HB 2162 is another one that we'll be talking about again. This is one that we were focusing on throughout the regular and special sessions, on early literacy screening and interventions. It would require the use of a diagnostic literacy instrument approved by TEA for grades kindergarten through 3. Early literacy assessments need to be valid and reliable, providing progress monitoring, offering diagnostic tools for teachers, and screening for dyslexia. I do want to clarify here that most school districts already use a diagnostic literacy instrument in these grades. So this is not any new testing. It's ones that we already do. They're very short, around 20 minutes. And this would provide a process so that we can make sure that those assessments are high quality and actually being utilized when providing actionable data so that teachers can reach students in a better way. And this is not a dyslexia screener. That is a separate test, but it would indicate if a student might need to take that. And so in order to provide teacher with another tool to see that. School districts must approve early literacy interventions for students determined to need targeted support. These interventions must use high quality instructional materials and be provided by a teacher who has attended a literacy achievement academy. And for students who continue to need intervention after 2 consecutive school years, districts must provide for supplemental instruction, and parents may select a tutor from a list of high quality tutors approved by TEA or by the school district. So this is one that was not passed again during the regular session, and that we did see come up again in special session. Some of these language bits changed a little bit from session to session, but the core of this was something that we did see again, and we're going to continue to monitor. So the regular session ended without some of those measures passed in terms of school finance, in terms of teacher support, early literacy, and property taxes. One thing that I will note that we haven't covered yet throughout this, and it's because as an organization, Good Reason Houston focuses on public schools, but there was a big push, and this is a common thread throughout the legislative sessions, to implement an education savings account program. Education savings accounts are public funds that are put into a pool that parents can apply for, and they would receive an allotment that they could use to send their child to a private school, for example, or to provide tutoring services. And again, as we're an organization that doesn't cover private schools, we just focus on public schools. This is really outside the scope of our work, but it is something that we'll need to talk about throughout the rest of this presentation, because it becomes very vital to the narrative of what went on during the special sessions. But know that at the end of the regular session, an ESA program did not pass. Property tax did not get consensus between both of the chambers. And some of those other measures that we talked about with teacher support and school finance were also not able to get across the finish line, which leads us to special sessions. The first 2 special sessions in the summer both focused on property tax. So Governor Abbott called the first special session on May 29th, immediately after the regular session concluded. The call directed the legislature specifically to consider and act upon legislation to cut property tax rates solely by reducing the school district maximum compressed tax rate in order to provide lasting property tax relief for Texas taxpayers. That's verbatim. What this means is that what he was asking the legislature to do would be to reduce property taxes just by reducing the school district's tax rate. So the way that school finance works is that districts do receive some funding from the state, but most of their allocation actually comes from local property taxes. And so these are called maintenance and operations taxes. And what they were considering during the summer is how to reduce the amount of property taxes that a school district takes in and replace it essentially with state aid. So the Texas House and Senate were not able to reach a consensus within the 30-day special session, the first one. So the governor called a second special session on June 27th, expanding the call just a little bit, allowing them a little bit more room with how they could accomplish the property tax relief for voters. And so ultimately, they were able to pass property tax changes. They allocated $12.6 billion to reducing school property taxes and $18 billion overall to property tax relief, including an increase to the homestead exemption. And for some of you homeowners that might be on the call, you probably saw that reflected in what you received in the mail about your taxes this year. While voters approved the changes on November 7th, pending litigation could actually delay the property tax reduction, and that's really outside the scope of this presentation, but did just want to give everybody a heads up that there is some litigation happening there, and we might not see those changes quite yet, depending on how that goes. Importantly, and this is really important, school districts, based on this legislation, will not see an overall increase in their budgets. This did not increase the amount of money that schools have per student. The changes made by the legislature only serve to reduce the amount of revenue that they receive from local property taxes from homeowners, and then offset that reduction with state funding. So it's really a net neutral for school district budgets. There were some floor amendments by different legislators to try and allocate more money to schools and increase teacher salaries during these special sessions, but those floor amendments did not pass because the main focus here was on the property tax changes. And even after these changes, the legislature still had that $14 billion that I mentioned earlier set aside for legislation related to education, and that had not yet been allocated at that time. Which brings us to special sessions 3 and 4. So with $4 billion still available to allocate to public education, there were a number of things that the legislature might be able to do with that money. Importantly, as some context for this, the Texas House convened the Educational Opportunity and Enrichment Committee over the summer to hear from the public and explore some different options. They released their list of recommendations in August that were pretty extensive and covered a number of the things that we've talked about, including the Texas Teacher Vacancy Task Force, assessment and accountability. It included school finance in a bunch of different ways. However, the governor's focus has continued to be on an education savings account program. And that's something that the Senate overall has supported. So the governor called the third special session on October 9th. And while the call was more extensive than just education, there were other non-education policies on the call. In relevant part, it directed the legislature to consider and act upon legislation providing education savings accounts for all Texas school children. So this is a very narrow, very limited call for the legislature, and wouldn't allow them to, for example, get too far into school finance or any of the teacher things we talked about. The narrow scope of the call amplified some tension between the House and Senate over school choice. And so the Senate filed SB1, which was a school choice bill that put together an education savings account proposal, and SB2, which was a full school finance bill. Those were two separate bills in the Senate. And even though school choice was the only thing on the call with the education savings accounts, they did go ahead and file that finance bill. And SB2 would have increased the basic allotment, allocated additional funds for teacher compensation, and expanded the teacher incentive allotment. But it sought to keep the spending within the remaining $4 billion appropriation from the regular session. So they really wanted to stick to the amount that was already appropriated. Alternatively, the House filed HB1, which was a large, comprehensive omnibus bill covering, in part, these are just a few parts of HB1, school finance, including increases to the basic allotment, teacher vacancy task force recommendations beyond just teacher compensation. So it included the Texas teacher residency program, for example, and school choice with an education savings account proposal, early education by bringing back that early literacy bill language from the regular session that we talked about previously, and academic accountability. So it was a very comprehensive bill that went well beyond what the governor included on the call. With the House at a standstill and unable to move forward on school choice alone, the governor expanded the call at the very end of the special session. So it now included legislation relating to primary and secondary education, including the establishment of an education savings account program, certification, compensation, and health coverage for certain public school employees, public school finance system, special education. I won't read the entire call, but just know that that was the exact caption of HB1. So that's exactly what the House said HB1 covered. And also separately, legislation related to school safety measures and related state funding mechanisms. So the 30-day limit for special session 3 ran out before the House managed to move HB1, but they were set up for the next special session number 4, with the newly expanded call. The governor reissued that on November 7th. So now we're moving into the 4th special session this year. HB1, SB1, and SB2 were all refiled. So just as a recap, HB1 was the large omnibus bill that covered all things public education. SB1 was the Senate's education savings account bill, and SB2 is the Senate's school finance bill. So the House also filed HB2, which was a bill focused on school safety funding. SB2 would provide grants to school districts to help implement and comply with statutorily required safety measures passed in the regular session. And later on, towards the very end of special session number 4, the Senate filed SB5 as an alternative school safety bill. And this is notable because these bills were meant to address some of the implementation concerns that districts had with HB3 from the 88th regular session. That was the bill that required armed officers at every campus, and many school districts were having trouble with complying it. We actually have an officer shortage in Texas as well. And so financially, it was an additional burden for schools. And what these bills would have done would be providing grants to school districts so that they could implement some of those required safety measures that the legislature passed during the regular session. However, ultimately, the legislature was unable to pass any of the proposed education policies. When HB1 reached the House floor for a full chamber vote, an amendment was proposed to remove the section implementing education savings accounts. And in a 84-63 vote, the House approved to remove school choice from HB1, which effectively grounded the bill. So the author of the bill remitted it to committee, and it did not move after that. So what this shows is that the House and the Senate were really unable to reach a consensus specifically on education savings accounts. And that is what the governor was really trying to get at with these special sessions in the fall. And because they weren't able to reach a consensus on that, and the House was unwilling to move forward with it, they didn't pass any of the other education policies, including those for school finance, safety, and teacher compensation. So all of those things that we were focused on as an organization and that a number of our partners and local folks have been looking at were all essentially contingent upon the education savings account reaching the end of the line there. So next I want to talk about some outstanding policy issues. These are the things that we're still looking at post fourth special legislative session, because we think that these are things that the legislature needs to keep their eye on moving forward. So first, early education funding. HB1 would have expanded the early education allotment to include pre-kindergarten. This is a pool of funding currently earmarked for supporting educationally disadvantaged and emergent bilingual students in kindergarten through third grade. Early literacy, HB1 also revisited the proposal, as I mentioned, from HB 2162 from the 88th regular session, which would have focused on early literacy screening and support for students who are falling behind. The Texas teacher incentive allotment, both HB1 and SB2, would have expanded the teacher incentive allotment by increasing allocations and adding a new designation for teachers and expanding the pool of funding so that we could better compensate our highly effective educators. The Texas teacher residency program reintroduced HB1, I'm sorry, there's a typo there, reintroduced the Texas Teacher Residency Program, which was a robust option for future educators to receive paid on-the-job training and instruction while working towards their certification. Additional missed opportunities include recommendations by the Texas Teacher Vacancy Task Force, which were a number of policies that aligned with those recommendations to support our educators, including a time study, financial support for certain certifications, and technical support for TIA implementation and strategic staffing. So it would have been a lot of opportunity for school districts to be able to support our teachers. And an increase to the basic allotment. More broadly, both HB1 and SB2 would have increased funding to school districts by increasing the basic allotment, which is the amount that school districts receive per student in order to meet their educational needs. There's one issue specifically that was in House Bill 1 that we want to keep our eye on moving forward, which again focuses on assessment and accountability. And this is something that as an organization we're concerned about. So Article 9 of House Bill 1 would have eliminated the statewide academic accountability system by 2026, and it didn't have a full proposal for what the system that took its place would look like. So what this means is Chapter 39 of the Education Code covers our entire assessment and accountability system, and this would have eliminated that by 2026. And until that point, it would have reverted our A through F accountability system that is used by the state to provide insight into how different campuses and districts are serving students. It would revert that to the 2022 accountability manual, which included implementation of state law to hold districts harmless for pandemic-related learning loss and assigned a not rated designation rather than D and F ratings for our lowest performing campuses. And now that we're moving past the pandemic and schools are addressing learning loss issues, we really need to be able to see where schools are still struggling to meet those needs so that we can provide some additional support there. So by not giving DNF rated ratings for an additional few years, that would essentially mean that we would go 8 years without a fully functioning academic accountability system. Instead, the bill proposed a commission on assessment and accountability that would be broadly charged with making recommendations for improvements to the current public school assessment and accountability systems and the adoption of a new assessment and accountability system. Why this is important is that our current accountability system is actually based on the recommendations of a commission that was put together in 2016. So we've already gone through this commission process to implement our current system, and this instead would eliminate the current system and propose a new commission, but without any guarantee of what that looks like, so that the public knows what to expect moving forward in terms of accountability for schools. This is something that we're keeping our eye on. It did not pass with the rest of HB1. However, we do expect this conversation to keep coming up and to continue. And so that's one to watch. This brings us to our recommendations. We believe that we need to maintain a strong assessment and accountability system. The academic accountability system sets clear expectations for school districts regarding academic achievement and progress, and it provides the public with transparent access to information about student learning. Without a clear vision of the future of accountability, districts would be left without guidance for student academic outcomes. Parents would be left without the necessary information to support their child's education, and students would be left without a mechanism to ensure our education system is doing its best to support their academic success. With only 44% of students in Houston reading on grade level by third grade, parents, families, and community members need to be able to hold school systems accountable for student learning. Next, we should address the teacher vacancy task force recommendations. Texas schools must be able to recruit and retain highly effective educators. Currently, we're experiencing a statewide teacher shortage. To meet student needs, 1 in 3 new teachers hired in the 2022-2023 school year in Texas schools were uncertified. The legislature should continue to work to adopt recommendations from the Texas Teacher Vacancy Task Force. In particular, we stand by all of the recommendations, but in particular, we believe that implementing a teacher residency program is key to strengthening our pipeline for effective educators. And in addition to other compensation adjustments, expanding the teacher incentive allotment to compensate our highly effective educators by adding that additional step and increasing the allotment given to each designated teacher. Focus on high quality early education. A strong early education is critical to setting the foundation for later learning. Only 5% of students who are not reading on grade level by third grade are able to catch up within 2 years. To ensure our students get the resources they need in their education, the legislature should revisit the proposals for early literacy in HB 2162 and in HB1 to implement effective screening for early literacy skills and support for students in grades kindergarten through third grade. While HB 3 from the 86th regular session, so this is the one that introduced the early education allotment, not the school safety bill. While it did introduce that landmark allotment, currently the funding only covers grades kindergarten through third grade. We would recommend expanding this allotment as well, as was proposed by HB1 to include pre-kindergarten. So this would allow districts to focus more attention and resources on high quality instruction for our very youngest learners by adding that additional funding for pre-K. So that covers what went on during the legislature, the regular legislative session, all 4 special sessions this year. And you can stay in the loop with us to keep up to date on what's happening with the Texas Legislature and with education policy more broadly by visiting goodreasonhouston.org/stay informed. That's where our blog is located. And also you have the ability to sign up for our newsletters so that you get those alerts. Follow us on social media. We're at Good Reason Houston or at Good Reason HOU, depending on the platform. And we are always looking to partner with anybody in these efforts. If these are areas that you are also interested in, whether you work for an organization or you're a parent or a teacher or a community member, we would love to hear from you. You can always get in touch with me, Trista Bishop Watt, at trista@goodreasonhouston.org. I'll end by saying, while a lot was left up in the air at the end of the special session, it's unclear moving forward what we might be able to expect for the rest of the school year from the legislature. There is still $4 billion that has been appropriated for this biennium. That means for these 2 years before the legislature meets again for their next regular session in 2025. So with $4 billion that is still up for grabs, and a lot of feedback from school districts about school finance and needed teacher supports, it's very possible that there could be another special session. The governor is still very interested in getting an education savings account passed. And so that's also something that might pop up in another special session, or this could be on hold until the legislature meets again in 2025. Either way, Good Reason Houston continues to have our pulse on all of these issues, and we will be watching and sharing out anytime there is movement on any of these things. Just know that we're going to continue to advocate for those policy priorities that we shared in the beginning. And if those are things that you would like to partner on, please reach out and stay in touch. Thank you all for joining us today. We certainly appreciate that you want to stay in the loop on public education policy, and be sure to visit goodreasonhouston.com to learn more about us and some of the resources that we have. Everybody have a fantastic day.